Hey there, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at some German music. Specifically, these are records from my collection from what some people call the Krautrock era of music, which I'll explain in a minute, as well as Kraftwerk records. And Kraftwerk records are also related to Krautrock. So before we begin, I'll just say that Krautrock was a term originally coined by the British press, and it was sort of a humorous, term to represent music that was being done in Germany post-World War II in, let's say, the 1960s and 70s. It was kind of like progressive rock as well as electronic music, and in some cases, a bit of an ambient sound as well, which actually had a lot of influence on a lot of people, including David Bowie, as well as Brian Eno, and many others as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at now. I thought that I would start with the Kraftwerk records because they might be more familiar to some of you. Let's actually just start. This was Kraftwerk's album called Autobahn, and this was before they, sort of before they really hit big time. And, if you're probably familiar with the track Autobahn, fahren on the Autobahn. Anyway, so then you have a picture. Autobahn in Germany means highway, and there you've got a picture of the highway with, looks like an old Mercedes and a VW bus. And on the back you've got sort of a picture of Kraftwerk looking very sort of, 1960s looking back here, 1970s. This guy has long hair. This is not really the image that they gave later. And here you can see the tracks. Side 1 is just one long 22-minute track of Autobahn. And side 2 you have these other tracks, which are sort of more experimental and more kind of like what Krautrock really was. Although much of Krautrock is very listenable and soothing and calming. It's very interesting music, actually. So if you're not familiar with it, it's something that if you're interested in records and music, it's something that you should probably listen to at some point anyway. But there you can see Kraftwerk was, in this incarnation, was Ralf Hutter, Florian Schneider, Klaus Roeder, and Wolfgang Flür. Okay, so anyway, so this is Kraftwerk's Autobahn. And as I mentioned before, that picture of them on the back wasn't really sort of how they portrayed themselves later, because this is sort of more this album here, which is Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express. You can see that they've sort of changed, and they're kind of like looking a little bit like, as you can see down here, they put this little sort of J-Star Up Paris thing right here, and they're kind of throwing back to like maybe before the war, or sort of mid 20th century European look. Some might say a little bit too master race-ish, but I would say that I think that they were reacting maybe to like the messiness of the 60s, and then their sound really became much more electronic and worked out and less experimental. But it's a good album, though. Trans-Europe Express is a great tune. So is Europe Endless, Hall of Mirrors, Showroom Dummies, of course, Trans-Europe Express, Metal on Metal, Franz Schubert, which is the classical composer, and Endless Endless. So, and there's another picture of them sort of posing in this sort of neo, sort of 1940s looking photographic portraiture. Great album, Kraftwerk, Trans-Europe Express, much different than whatever other people were doing at the time, and had a real nice, was actually a very, how should I say, influential group, and an interesting album, especially if you like electronic music. The next album by Kraftwerk was this album, Computer World. Now, this album, I remember, came out around, I don't know, maybe 81, 82, 83. Actually, don't quote me on that, but somewhere in those years. And this came out, and this actually in New York City had a big, big effect on sort of like the dance scene or the disco scene. Maybe it came out in 78 or 77. In any case, it was close to the disco era. And it was played a lot in the clubs, and a lot of people really got into this music. I was just, barely a kid back then, but I certainly remember this record. And it's a great record. What's interesting about this record is that they made a lot of comments in this record about computers. And this was before really most people, it was before the Macintosh came out. And it was sort of really before computers, before the internet and all of these things like that. And they were really astute enough to make cultural commentaries about computers. Here's the back. And you can see them. As a matter of fact, these are not the band. These are actually, let's say, mannequins or robots of the band. And often when they would go on tour, the robots would play the concert. As a matter of fact, I saw Kraftwerk in the 80s on this tour, on the Computer World tour. Like I said, I was a young kid, kind of, but old enough to get in. And it was a great show. It was at the Ritz in New York City. And they came out and they were playing their instruments, and their set looked like, they had the mannequins, but also it was a live show. They were actually there in the flesh for most of the show. As a matter of fact, for all of the show, except for the very beginning. The set on the stage where they played, it looked like the bridge of Star Trek. I mean, it was such a cool. I think that was really one of the best shows that I've ever seen. I mean, it was in 1980 something, 83 or something. I don't really even remember, and it was just. I mean, the music on here is just an excellent record, and the show was just so, out of this world. Like what planet are these guys from? But anyways, here's the tracks. We've got like Computer World. We've got Pocket Calculator, Numbers. That's a great track. Computer World, Computer Love, which is like kind of about online romance, and they didn't even have online romance back then. Home Computer, It's More Fun to Compute. So if you haven't listened to Computer World, you really should either pick it up or listen to it, because it's really a fun and visionary album. So now we're going to get to the more like other krautrock type of people, including this band here, Cluster. And Cluster was formed by two German guys who were named Roedelius and Moebius. And they created this band Cluster and they recorded for the Sky label. And basically these guys were real sort of interesting guys, and basically made some really cool stuff. This is their album. I think this is their fourth album, Sowie So. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. Sowie So or Sowie Sao, whatever. Anyway, I have no idea of what it means either. But it's an interesting listen. You got it's certainly it's kind of like a lot of synthesizers, and it's rhythmic, it's melodic, so it's very interesting. And as I said, these guys were this kind of music. After Ziggy Stardust and all that, Bowie moved over to Berlin for a while, and he worked with people, including Eno and people like that. So, for example, like on David Bowie's Low, on side 2, you'll hear a very krautrock influence there. And by the way, I hear that a lot of the artists, for example, Roedelius and Moebius, were not really so into that moniker, krautrock. They didn't really like that, but it stuck, like a lot of things stick, and then it became known as that genre. of music, but not everybody was that pleased about that. But anyway, here's a picture of the guys in the band. He's petting a dog there, and it's on that Sky label. And here's the track list. I won't even attempt to pronounce those words. And so this is their fourth album, Soy Sao Sao, or Soy So So. A very interesting record. This is their seventh album, which is called Gross Wasser, which I'm no German speaker, but it seems to me that it means big water. And then you have sort of a diving board into some big water there. I'm not really sure. It's by Cluster, Roedelius and Moebius. There's the back. It's on the Sky label. And as you can see here is the name of the tracks. So a track list there. All titles by Roedelius and Moebius. So that's Gross Wasser. Also a very interesting album. It's hard to really describe this music. You just have to listen to it. But I think that for those of you who like Bowie's period of that, like in Low and stuff, you're going to like this. This album is called Offenturer, which, once again, I have no idea what it is. It's a solo album by Roedelius. Okay, it's also sort of a very minimal design. It looks like he just, wrote it by hand. Here's the tracks. Not sure if that's much help there, but you can sort of see what it says. Alemanda, which I think means Germany. I'm not sure. So I think Berlin was kind of an interesting place back then because, it was sort of like really heavily bombed out in World War II. And I know that, besides Bowie, Iggy Pop went there, and it was just kind of like, that Germany was rebuilding. It was separated between East Germany and West Germany. And I think that the artists were just like kind of free to just do whatever interesting things they wanted because, what did they have to lose, But anyway, this is a record by Moebius and Conny Plank. It's called Rostakraut Pasta. And it's also an electronic album. And this guy, Conny Plank, by the way, was a real influential engineer, sound engineer, and technologist and innovator when it came to technology, especially in what became electronic music, and also worked a lot with Kraftwerk. He produced some of their albums and produced other albums too. As a matter of fact, he went on to become a very successful record producer. Except I was reading somewhere that they wanted him to produce a U2 album, and after meeting Bono, he declined. But anyway, I just read that somewhere. But anyway, Rostakraut Pasta, interesting album. It looks like some kind of like toothpaste thing over here. And on the back, you can see, once again, it's on the Sky label. And here are the tracks. Rostakraut Pasta. Okay, now next up, Brian Eno. For those of you who know Brian Eno, obviously he started with Roxy Music and was in the first two Roxy Music albums. Then he had sort of a solo career. Here Come the Warm Jets and all these other albums, including Before and After Science, which is an album that I used to have. Actually, I think I had most of his albums. So anyway, he went over to Germany at some point, and he met Moebius and Roedelius and Plank, and they collaborated on a few tracks which are on this album called Begegnungen, which I also don't know what that means, but it's an interesting album. Here you have some pictures. Here's the track list, by the way. You can see that Eno's not on all of these tracks, but he is on a few of them. And by the way, also, I think that Eno's encounter with these guys led him on to do some of his more sort of experimental stuff, like ambient stuff. And, you know, Bowie, of course, worked a lot with Eno as well. So this was all connected in some ways with that period in Germany. I also had this album lying around. This is really not really much of a Krautrock album, but this is sort of the kind of things that Brian Eno did after. Harold Budd, The Pavilion of Dreams. So it's, I had it, so I thought I'd throw it into this pile to look at as well. Anyway, I just chucked it on there. You know, I like some of what Brian Eno did, but sometimes, I don't know how to put it, but certainly the Krautrock albums and this genre, especially these without Eno, are very interesting. I tend to prefer it when it's just cluster themselves. And of course, I really do like what David Bowie did and how it influenced him very, very much. And then of course you've got Computer World, what a classic. Trends, Europe Express, and Kraftwerk's Autobahn. Anyway, so I hope that was a little informative into some German music and that scene, including Kraftwerk and Krautrock. And you can look it up for yourself and check it out. In the meantime, thanks again for watching this video. And if you liked it, please press like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you care to, you can also leave a comment. Thanks again. Have a great day.